Hello. Today I have with me Harry Moser, founder of the Reshoring Initiative and former president of machine tool maker GF AG Charmy. I'm Mark Hoske, control engineering editor in chief. Harry, thanks for revisiting the reshoring topic with us. To start, could we talk about maybe the most single important thing control engineering subscribers should know about reshoring efforts today?
Uh, the insight, the elevator speech kind of thing, is that about 20 or 30% of what they or their customers are offshoring or importing can be made here, sourced here profitably, and equal profitability, and not having to raise the price to the customer. So there's a huge opportunity for hundreds of billions of dollars worth of work to come back and millions of jobs to be created.
Good. And so, by way of introduction, now that we got the most important thing out of the way, please tell us a little bit about you and about the Reshoring Initiative and some of the recent progress you've made.
Okay. So I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is right across the river from New York City. And the biggest thing in town when I was growing up and for 50 years before then was Singer Sewing Machine. They had their main plant there, the Elizabethport plant. 3 million square feet, 5,000 workers. So back in 1900, that was the biggest factory of any kind in the world. And my dad ran a third of it. My grandfather was a foreman. I worked there summers. And I drove past 10 years ago, and there's nothing there. Nothing, as far as I can tell, nothing of Singer's made in the US had all been replaced by imports from lower wage countries, first Japan, and then eventually, wherever, China. And during my career, I then sold CNC machine tools and foundry equipment. And industry after industry, company after company I wanted to sell to got wiped out by imports. And so I felt I started to work in 67, and I felt the decline of US manufacturing as this hollowing out occurred. And that's why I founded the Reshoring Initiative, to turn that around.
And there has been some decent progress recently.
There's been very good progress. I've got a slide I can pull up. So this shows the number of jobs announced per year, starting in 2010, the year that the Reshoring Initiative was founded, and coming up to 2023, broken down between the blue line, which is reshoring, in other words, jobs brought back by a U.S. headquartered company, think General Motors, and FDI, jobs brought here by foreign headquartered companies, think Toyota or Siemens, for example. And so you can see we've gone from a total of about 11,000 a year in 2010 to last year about 297,000 between the two of them. So whatever that is, 25, 30 times the rate of jobs coming back.
We recently asked control engineering and plant engineering subscribers questions related to reshoring and covered the results in two articles. Perhaps the most important slide was that 42% who answered, and a majority of answered, said that Made in America was either important or very important. So did you have any additional comments about how reshoring relates to industrial automation and what's going on with production efficiencies?
I went through each of the documents you sent me, and I'll start with figure 1. You talked about the value for plant operations, and it's about the value that was brought by reshoring. And it wasn't clear to me whether they were talking about the value for the plant operations, like we'll become more efficient, or the value of having a made in USA product to sell to the consumer who bought their product. And each is a form of value. I interpreted it to mean in terms of their plant efficiency, but it wasn't clear that I could tell from the questions. So relative to that, consumers, if it was the consumer aspect, consumers say they prefer made in USA, but they do not often do so. If you go to Walmart, you see they're mostly buying things made somewhere else. And I believe a big portion of that is that it's awfully hard to find the made in USA product. If like I'll go into a store and want to buy something, and I say, tell me where's your made in USA stuff. And they say, well, you have to turn all the labels over on all the shirts, to find something. And I'm not going to, hours it would take to find 1 in 100. So I don't do it. And everybody else, I think, has the same attitude. But I believe that if the consumer was given, if it was easy for the consumer to find the made in USA product, that they would buy more USA product and even pay 10%, 20%, like your survey said, maybe 10, 20% more. And that when they did that, then the retailer would stock more and the manufacturer would make more, and we'd have this virtuous spiral that would go like this. So I believe that availability is key. In contrast, the manufacturer, when they're buying, let's say, components, tools, things like that, they pretty much know where it's made. Maybe not if they're buying it from a distributor. They're buying nuts and bolts and screws and things that they might not know, but basically, if it's something that they're buying from someone who's making the thing, they know where the product's going to be made, and they've chosen that source instead of a domestic source. There's a slide that shows the percentage of companies that say that they are reshoring or plan to reshore. And so it's gone from 2012, about 8%, up to 2022, 90%. Now, probably 90 is a little too high. Probably it's 70 or it's 80, but still just a dramatic, consistent uptrend in the percentage of companies saying that they are or plan to reshore. Now, it's not always, it's rarely shut every factory everywhere else in the world and bring it all back and build $100 billion worth of new factories here in the United States. Companies don't do that, but it's at least shifting some of the production from offshore facilities to domestic facilities, either their own facilities or to outsourced to job shops, pump makers, things that come into that bigger company to make the end product. So we believe that for every job, say at an assembly plant, there's 2 or 3 jobs at the supplier plants. And so our data recognizes that totality of that supply chain.
Right. Yeah. The industrial job builds on itself where other jobs don't have such an additive effect to the economy.
Multiplier effect is highest in manufacturing. Yeah.
So for young people who are deciding between maybe a wealth management career because they're good in math or an engineering related wealth creation career, what inspiration can you offer?
Yeah, there's a lot of satisfaction from manufacturing. I've read what people have written, notable successful manufacturers have written about the satisfaction of being responsible for something like that car that's behind me in the visual, or a pump, or a casting, or a machine part of some kind. The feeling, whether you're the president of the company or you're the CNC machine tool operator or the automated equipment operator, the feeling that you made a good part that's going to satisfy your customer, and maybe it's going to help keep jobs here in the United States. So I believe there's a lot of satisfaction there. Now I've got BS and MS from MIT and an MBA from the University of Chicago, so I could have gone into finance, and maybe I'd be richer. I don't know, but I did fine, and I'm actually writing an article about people who in the machine tool industry, which is what I've basically been in, but people in the machine tool industry who started as apprentice, either here or maybe more likely in Europe, some here, and are now vice presidents, presidents of decent sized companies, have jobs just as good or better than people that got a bachelor's degree or an MBA. And because they had that practical understanding of the process and of the product that they were dealing with, and they got to know the customer. So I don't think it's a black and white decision of money versus no money. I think there's more, at least as much satisfaction in the manufacturing job, and on average maybe a little less money, but a good balance. Another maybe interesting thought. I was in New York. I spoke at a Bank of Montreal conference, and there's these guys who are there, sharp young guys, 20, 30-year-old kind of thing, MBAs, all kinds of degrees, and they're saying, I can't afford to buy an apartment. I said, what do you mean you can't? You're making, well, it turns out they're making a lot of money, but by real lot of money. I can't afford to buy an apartment here in New York. And yet if you're a manufacturing guy in Erie or Meadville or Toledo, pretty easy. You're making 60,000, 70,000, eventually $100,000 a year. You can buy a pretty damn nice house and live a pretty darn good life. So there's somehow, as in that financial end, the costs go up to match the income.
Yeah, and there's a quality of life issue involved as well, as you mentioned.
Yes. Yeah. Some of these guys start out with the financial companies and they're working 80 hours a week or 100 hours a week for a couple of years to earn their spurs. And the manufacturing person, maybe they're working 50 or 60, but if so, at least they're getting paid overtime when they're doing it.
Yeah. So as we all experienced, Harry, the COVID-19 pandemic challenged just-in-time supply chains. How are automation and reshoring helping improve those challenges?
Now, I've got an interesting story on that. Do you know what AME is? Association for Manufacturing Excellence. They're the Lean
Sure.
Association. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was at their annual conference maybe 3 years ago, sort of just past the peak of COVID. And Kim Humphrey, who's the president, and a couple other really sharp people were there. And she, I think, we had a little panel we had, brought up the question, what's happened? Are companies too lean? Have companies gotten too lean, as exemplified by too much dependence on just in time? Did they let their inventories get so low that now they're getting burned because of that? And everybody else said, yeah, a little too lean, a little too, need to have more inventory, blah, blah, blah. And I said, no. I took the contrarian view. I said, not lean enough. Because if they were truly lean, they would have done like Toyota and the other companies that are truly lean, is source most of their product domestically and locally, and therefore they would be able to reduce their just-in-time inventories because they'd have short delivery times of, say, a day or a week instead of something of months, perhaps, from off season, more months if anything goes wrong. And so they didn't all say yes, but they couldn't prove me wrong. So
And
I
in some
believe
cases with the supplier manufacturer right across the street from the
across the
yeah,
street, which is
yeah.
the ideal situation. And so I believe that I'm sure that as delivery time, as reshoring continues to happen and delivery times get better, that just in time will be increasingly valuable. So, for example, we offer something called the TCO estimator, total cost of ownership, that helps companies go away from looking at just the X works price, which is almost always cheaper there, to include the duty and the freight, the carrying cost of inventory, et cetera, but also the value of, say, a 2-day delivery time instead of a 2-month delivery time. And so any listeners who have any data on what short delivery time is worth to them, I'd love to hear about it, because I'm building that into the total cost of ownership estimator.
Yeah. Anything else that you'd like to address or encourage users and system integrators and suppliers of automation about reshoring efforts?
Yeah, I'd like to if I can get my slides working here again. So here's something interesting. The recent survey showed that the number one driver of reshoring is geopolitical risk. So it's companies who are afraid that some event will happen. Like they're dependent on Israel. I don't know what's going to happen over next to Israel. They were dependent on the country in Ukraine or the countries around there, or on Russia, and you've got a war going over there. So what's happening to delivery? They're dependent on China or Taiwan, and there's a chance of a war over China and Taiwan. And if that happened, there'd be nothing coming out of either of those countries. And it won't be a 1 week delay or a 1 month delay. It could be a year, it could be years, who knows how long. And so we came out with a geopolitical risk map that shows the probability of decoupling, the probability of being cut off for an extended period of time, think months, think 6 months or a year, from a U.S. customer cut off from its supplier in some other country or continent like Africa. And so as a base mark, we found some surveys from geopoliticians and concluded that the probability of that happening with China is about 3.5% per year, that there's 3.5% probability of decoupling. And so then in our TCO estimator revision, there'll be a methodology for them to say, let's see, if I don't get all these parts from China, how much of my end product will I not be able to ship for what period of time until I can find a new source? And it's going to be hard to find a new source because 30,000 other companies are going to be in the same situation I am and calling up all the suppliers to get what I need. Okay. And so how much dollar sales will I lose? How much margin will I therefore lose? What's the probability? You get an expected value of margin loss. And then how much more can I afford to pay for components sourced domestically instead of from China, for example, and to assure that I have the product or the components so I can ship my product, make my margin, keep my customer. And so this thought process, companies are thinking of reshoring as a form of insurance against that existential risk, which it would be for some of them. I'm going to show you another couple of things here. There is a substantial price difference between the U.S. and other countries. So I have took 190 cases where the users had done our TCO analysis and put in the U.S. FOB price, the free on board price, and the Chinese price. And this is a statistical distribution of that. Horizontal axis is China price as a percentage of U.S. price. At 100, they're equal. Left side, China's cheaper. Right side, U.S. is cheaper. U.S. is almost never cheaper. But the mode of the distribution, or the center, is sort of around 65, 70%. So China price is 35% or so less than U.S. price. So it's a dramatic. You can see why companies went and did it. But our solution to that is the TCO estimator, so which I mentioned before. So the blue line is that same distribution. You can see it's about the same shape, it's just smooth. And the TCO red line is the price plus the duty and the freight and the carrying cost of inventory and other relevant considerations that most people would consider to be real. You can see it shifts 10 or 15 points to the right. And then if there's a Section 301 tariff, the tariffs that Trump put in place, that comes out to the orange line. So the percentage that the U.S. wins goes from 8% based on price to 32% based on total cost to 46% if there's a 15% tariff. So it goes from you never win to half the time you can win. And so that's why I say that if in your startup, you said, well, what should people remember? That if they'll do the math correctly, they'll find out that 20% or so of what they import now, they can bring back and be equally profitable. Again, as long as they do the math correctly. So there's always a question of like I'll present about this and I'll say, hey, we got to automate, because our wages are higher, 2, 3, 4, 5 times as high. And so you got to automate if you're going to be competitive. And then people will say, but if we automate, are we going to have any jobs? And if we eliminate all the jobs, what have we gained? And my answer is that since we're not an island, since we're in a jungle competing for the work, that we will lose more jobs to automation that happens in China and India and other countries, Germany, if we do not automate, because we'll lose competitiveness, than we will to automation that happens here in the United States. So if you want to compete, if you want to have jobs, if you want to have a strong economy, if you want to be able to support the military with materiel, if you want to work towards balancing the budget, improving the ecological balance, et cetera, that reshoring supported by automation is essential.
And we see decent examples of that over time where organizations can't fulfill critical jobs no matter how hard they try. And so they have to automate certain things to be able to redistribute the talent that they do have.
Because of the lack of available people. But at the same time, by having a modern factory, like right now, the Chinese have grown their production so rapidly over the last 10 or 15 years. Their factories are newer than ours. They have more robots than we do. They have, they're more attractive to a young engineer or young tool maker than ours would be for our young people. And so by turning that around and having a virtuous spiral here where the US is improving in technology and automation in sort of the environment, the we'll attract the people we need, which will make us more competitive, and we'll be back on the road again, so to speak. Anybody who wants help deciding to reshore, deciding to justify automation to reshore, then they can reach me at reshorenow.org, harry.moser at reshorenow.org. And one of the things, another interesting thing to think about, if you've got a say the price, the manufacturing cost is 10 here now and it's 7 there, and someone says, Bill, can you put together some automation that'll get our 10 down to 7? Can we take 30% out of manufacturing costs, which isn't just labor, but it's also material and burden, while you're spending millions of dollars on automation? And the answer is almost surely no, in most cases. Whereas if instead of being 10 and 7, it's 9 and 8.5 based on total cost of ownership, and there's only a 5% difference instead of a 30% difference. Now the feasibility of justifying that automation just went up substantially. So I would appeal to people to do their ROI calculation based on total cost of ownership rather than FOB price, and they'll be able to justify a lot more automation.
Great. Thanks so much, Harry, for your time. Harry Moser, founder of Reshoring Initiative. And I'm Mark Hoske, Control Engineering Editor-in-Chief. Thanks, Harry.